Hi, today I thought I'd talk about the scale that I use when I rate stories. I use a scale that goes from 1 to 10. I know a lot of people use a scale that goes from 1 to 5, but then they often end up having reviews that have like a 3.5 or a 4.5. Some even go so far as to have like a 3.25. I prefer to just keep it simple and use a straight 1 to 10. If you're used to a 1 to 5 rating, then just take my ratings and cut them in half. As for how I rate stories, I see it like this. As readers, we pretty much have to be honest with ourselves. Not every book's going to be an 8, a 9, or a 10. It sucks because authors put a lot of work into their writing, and it feels kind of crappy being overly critical on something that somebody put so much work in. It's just being honest about our feelings on a particular story. For example, my favorite author is Tim Powers. He writes books that are often called secret histories. These are books that weave real-world events into a fantastical narrative to make it seem more plausible. I love these kind of stories, but some of them just don't rate that highly for me. One good example of a story that rates high is The Stress of Her Regard. It's just a really good book. I didn't think the sequel was very good, though. It was called Hide Me Among the Graves. It was written a few years later, and I just didn't think it was all that great. I'd rate it like a 5 out of 10 when I would have rated The Stress of Her Regard a 10 out of 10. You're probably familiar with the bell curve because that's how a lot of teachers grade students in their classes when you were growing up. Basically, most people are kind of in the middle, while some fall to the left, which means they're not doing so well, and others fall to the right, which means they're doing better than most of the other people. And that's just how most stories should probably be rated, because not everything is going to knock it out of the park. And not everything is going to be totally bad either. A 1 or 2 is a story that just didn't do anything for me. I might not like the characters. I might not like the plot if there is one. Stories rated 1 or 2 are often just a lot of navel gazing without any plot happening around them. A 1 is just a complete disaster for me, whereas a 2 might have something that was somewhat redeeming even if it couldn't save the whole story. A 3 or 4 is a story that has decent writing and acceptable characters. However, the characters aren't very deep to the point of being stereotyped cardboard cutouts. Or there are obvious plot issues like, why didn't the character just do X, Y, Z when this happened? Or I just didn't like the plot. Another problem that will drop a story to a 3 or 4 is when a smart character does something really stupid just so that the plot can be driven forward another step. One problem I have that will drop a story to a 3 or 4 is when authors make up a bunch of slang that just seems to come out of nowhere. If they overuse it, it's definitely dropping the rating. For example, Farscape is my favorite sci-fi TV show of all time. I read some of the tie-in novels, and there was one novel in particular where the author just made up a bunch of slang and he used it in just about every chapter, and it was really annoying, kept taking me out of the story, and I really, really didn't like that book because of that one thing that was in there. Now, you might bring up the word frack used in Battlestar Galactica. However, that is similar to a word that we have in this world today, and it was never overused in Battlestar Galactica, either in the 1978 series or in the 2003 remake series. So I found it pretty much acceptable in that context. A 5 or 6 is a story that pretty much fits right in the middle of that bell curve that I talked about earlier. It either has characters that are deep enough to understand their believable motivations, or an engaging plot that moves along at a decent pace without major flaws or unexplained stupidity from the characters. In other words, it's a story that does its job by transporting me somewhere else for a while, as interesting characters that don't necessarily have to be likable deal with the events that are going on around them. Stories in this range may also be ones that add significant details to the shared world or the ongoing series that they're built into. Most published stories are probably going to be in this 5 to 6 range for me. A rating of 7 or 8 means that there was something that I really liked about the story. Maybe it added something unexpected to a character's background. Maybe it had an unexpected twist that I didn't see coming and it made the story that much better. Maybe I thought the character's actions were driven by one thing, but it turned out to be something totally different, and it surprised me. I really like it when an author can make my head turn quickly and be like, wow, I didn't see that coming. Stories like that are usually a 7 or 8 on my scale. A 9 or 10 means the story was written perfectly and had something that I enjoyed more than usual. The characters were developed just right without all the navel gazing that a lot of authors throw in there to show deep characters. The plot moved along at a good pace with well-placed increases and decreases in action. The history relayed in the story was an interesting take on events, or it was described so well that I could easily see it in my mind's eye. And probably most important of all, the ending was perfect, or as near to perfect as it could possibly be for that particular story. An example of a novel that fits that 9 or 10 range is The Legend of Nightfall by Mickey Zucker-Reichert. I thought it was a little slow and episodic at times, but by the time you got to the end, you cared about the characters, and the ending was so pitch perfect that I just really loved the novel. So hopefully that breaks down my rating scale for you, and you kind of understand why I rate things the way I do and why they may not agree with the way you would rate certain things, either higher or lower than I do. So that's really all I've got for this video. Keep reading until next time.